It's open source, we see on here.
Do a sermon if I stand here. Sorry? I'm going to do some sort of sermon if I stand like this. Okay, you guys are live to switch your microphones when you're ready to go.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to shut these doors, right?
Okay, cool, thanks. Is my camera in the way or is it okay?
Yeah, no, that's all good.
It's okay? Cool.
Awesome. Do you want to start with the health and safety?
Oh yeah, I forgot, thank you. So, just to get the kind of important bits out of the way.
So obviously, where are we?
Yeah, where are we? Is this questions for the audience? We are at Microsoft Reactor. I'm not going to read this out, have a quick look through it. Toilets are on the left on when you came in, so on the right from here, near when you signed in. Has everyone signed in as well? Brilliant. If there's a fire and you are coding, commit your code first, push it up, then leave. If it's a Mac, take it with you. If it's a PC, you can leave it, it's fine. The important point is the assembly is opposite the road and away from the fence bit. Like, I don't know if you remember
Look for the
walking
black
past
dot
this.
on the ground when you go outside, yeah?
Black dot on the ground, yeah. We'll follow the Microsoft people, so I'm sure it'll be fine, but it's roughly there. So come out of here and turn right.
So right, yeah.
Yes, right. Okay? If there's someone hurts themselves, you get a boo-boo, that's what I think it says kids here. Yeah, there's staff here know how to do stuff.
I think at reception, they probably won't go there.
No smoking. That's the last one.
That's it, good.
That's my bit, that's all you now, right? No?
You wish, you wish.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. What are we actually here for?
We're here, I'll just brush this. Okay, we're here. We didn't need the handheld mics for the live stream then?
No, we're okay.
Good.
They are just
Okay.
for passing around.
Okay, cool. Code Mortals. So this is a community we've started fairly recently, and we're really keen to share our experiences, but one of our main goals is we want to start the conversation. So we like to think we do things best practice, but we don't have all the answers, and we want to share the experience we've had for the last 15 years each, so 30 years combined. But we want to start that conversation. So today we're actually hoping to finish a bit early, therefore we can chat a bit more about what you're working on, any questions you have. Well, any questions you have, ask as we go along, of course. But if you have your... Oh, and there's a microphone there. Yes, for the live stream, there's a microphone.
Please ask questions into the microphone, otherwise anyone that is watching from the live stream won't hear, because we'll try and repeat them anyway.
But yeah, we'll try and repeat the questions. So we'll do ask as we go along. What else? Okay, so agenda for tonight. We're going to do a bit of talking, less code, more slides. We're going to give you an overview of how to do this and why you would do this and some of those details. And we are going to take a break.
I was going to say, we might take a break, but it might be a bit short, especially since we started a little later than planned.
Oh, that's true.
So it depends how much you need. But quick comfort break, grab a drink, and we'll get back to it.
Yeah, because I know last time we raced through like 2.5 hours straight. It was quite intense. So, but actually some people have still returned from last time, so that's good.
Can't have been that bad.
Yeah, and then Andrew is going to do all the hard work, and he's going to do some coding, and I'll just point at it and make it more difficult for him. And then, yeah, hopefully have Ask Me Anything at the end, where we can chat about what we've gone through today, anything else. More than happy to geek out and chat. And we plan to do a live stream about that as well, so if that's too short, then we'll do a live stream and we can do that. Is this your slide or my slide? I can't remember.
It's up to you. If you want to go straight to the first one.
Nah, you can do the first one.
Okay.
What's my drink?
So, I suppose we want to talk a little about the problem. I mean, has anyone worked on a large project and you found that it would have been great from the start to have split things up a bit more, but you didn't know how to do it? So, something you come across, something you've, yeah. Have you got any examples, perhaps, of how you did solve the problem? What did you do? Did you look at microsites, microservices? No. Okay. So one of the things you can do with the front end, I mean, we're all talking about Angular, so more on the front end, is to think about separating out into libraries. So one of the problems you might get is you have a single purpose, you have a large project, and it can only be used for that particular use case. The moment you want to start another project, it could be for the same company, you're then starting from scratch pretty much, with very little reusability from one project to the other. So that's one of the problems you come across with a big project that hasn't got sort of libraries that you've built as you've been going along that you can reuse. It becomes very monolithic, so you bring a new person into the team perhaps, they join the project, they can't really see what's going on because such a big project, you don't know where to start. You know, I've joined projects even sort of, I started this year, for example, and you look at the project and you go, wow, this is just spaghetti everywhere. I don't know what's going on. There's no clear sort of paths for anything. And you can spend weeks just getting up to speed on a project. Whereas if you've got a more focused area to say, okay, we're going to start you being responsible for the brand element of the project or for how the services work or something, then it becomes much easier again. So again, if you're looking at microservices, that's a similar kind of pattern there. It also helps, I think Eddie had this one.
I want to do this. Where's mine? Let me jump in. Come on,
I was
this
just
is
thinking,
mine.
I didn't add this one on the script slide. That's a new addition.
Yes, I snuck
go
that
on.
in earlier on. So everyone
Absolutely.
here knows, or who's followed my YouTube channel, I'm really passionate about open source. It's one of the key things I'm about. So many places are happy to open source maybe a generic part of their project, but it's usually kind of tangled into the code and they can't pull it out. If they did pull it out, it's a lot of work. So they think, oh, you know what, let's not open source it then. So I'm quite keen for, if you, I don't know, build a branding library or a graphing library, or you have a set of tools or helpers which you're going to go into, like if you're using the Angular terminology, like pipes and all those sorts of things, you can open source those and it can be used in other projects around the company, different departments, or even other companies can then contribute back to it and it help improve. So I think this is really important, and I'm going to lead with this one in the future when I go into client meetings. I want to say, this is why you should do this.
Perfectly valid point to make, because absolutely, we've spoken about it quite recently with people saying, well, if you're trying to open source something and you've put everything in one place, you start to get concerned. What's happening? Where do we keep the keys for the project? Where do we do this? Where do we do that? Whereas if you're taking all your different segments, you can distribute the fringe areas out and just keep that kind of core that you're concerned about to yourself. So it may be one way of getting big projects pushed out to the open source world. So that is good. Okay, that's a little bit about that. I mean, anything you want to add? Any commentary on that? Comfortable? Okay. So, why do it?
Why not? I think it's pretty easier actually to say why not, but okay, let's start
Absolutely.
with why.
I mean, it's the other side of what we just talked about, right? So why might you do it? Why want to do it for branding? So you're trying to build a new brand or you want to white label your project. So one example, and something we've done ourselves, is you take your project, you brand it up for one couple of days. Let's imagine you're a big corporate company made up of different segments, and each segment has its own brand, but you all want to have that same project available. How do you brand that up for everyone? Now, some people put that into different themes and they'll bake it into the code base, and there's lots of different answers to it. But another option is creating a separate library. And what you can do to make that consistent is you can take the tests for that library and rebuild multiple libraries for the same brand, but adhering to that same test suite. So you know that then that same branded project can work for any project, and you'll see how you can just build that out, distribute it out with the correct brand that you want. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried doing anything like that before. As I said, there's lots of ways that I've seen it done before. Most of them become quite problematic to maintain, and you end up having lots of code that you're pushing out for each project that become very bloated because it's trying to check based on a URL or something which one to use. But that's a good opportunity. Do you want to step in and take a couple?
Let me think. Let's see, reusability. So, I mean, I'm going to pick a concrete example here. I mean, can anyone think of a concrete example of what you'd put into, say, a library? I've got something in my mind, so I can jump out. But can you think of an example? Like what I'm thinking of is like a button, for example.
Could have maybe we could have one language tag sheets. Have logical parts in the company.
Yes.
Share the same branding across. So the fonts, the colors, the buttons, labels, etc.
Yeah, that would definitely be the branding one, and it allows you then to maybe white label because you could pull in different dependencies for it.
Also the reusable components.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have say for example user module or some validation services.
Yeah.
Give an example of the pipes.
Yeah, there is a slide coming up on that shortly. You're right with the pipes and the services, absolutely. So I think
Things like analytics, you might have Google Analytics, for example, and all your projects want that. It's not a branding thing, but it's a consistent way that you want to manage analytics for your project.
So yeah, it keeps it consistent. And one example is like if you're a button, like yes, you can have if it was in your project, and yes, you use styling. If you change the styling, it changes all the buttons everywhere in your project, depending on how you've done the selector. But what happens if you actually wanted to change the HTML that created that button, or how you've done it, or you want to change the button to something else? Then you'd have to go everywhere else and change the HTML. Whereas if it's in a library, then you just change it where you need to, and it will change it.
It's similar to the way we think about components these days anyway. So a lot of time you think about components, but you're still putting them into that project, single use for that project's case. But yeah, you could change it from a central place. The library doesn't necessarily completely solve that problem. Yeah. But it does allow you to obviously have reuse of it later.
And I think this is important. So when you're on large projects as well, they might have a specific team that does the branding. It might not be full-time, but they'll look after it. So they can move it forward if they need to, but you're still, because you're using NPM to manage that, then you don't have to take those changes in now. You can take them, upgrade them when you're ready, when you need them. So it allows things to work, I guess, asynchronously and move at different paces. What have we got next? I forget.
Okay, so we sort of said it in words, but this is just a very quick way of sort of depicting a little bit what you might have. So you might have an application, you might have multiple applications. All of them have a set of services that you want to be made available, models, so how you're sort of dictating the different structure of your objects. And then branding as well. So again, as I said, you might have multiple branding projects that could apply to each of those applications, or branding that needs to go across all of them. It just brings in a bit more of a dynamic way of breaking down what you're doing. But that was just a very quick kind of demonstration of what we've talked about, just visually, to see what we mean by this.
The models one is quite interesting actually, because you, who's worked with a kind of front end and back end sort of architecture? I'm guessing, or familiar with it at least. So sometimes you have the same models across both. Sometimes you have them different for whatever reason. If you're only consuming part of the data, you might have different models in the UI. But a lot of the time, you have the same. And then you just duplicate the code. And whereas if you had the models as a library, then you can share that. There's pros and cons to doing it. So I'm not saying it's a silver bullet to always do it, but sometimes it is needed. It depends on your project, on your stack, and on your business logic. But I find that's quite important, especially when I go to projects and I see that it's just literally copy and paste. And each time they edit something, they just copy and paste the entire folder over. I think there's a better way to manage that. Some of these have been mentioned already.
So how do we do it? Yeah, we've talked about some of these. This is just a reminder. So the main ways in Angular that you build up sort of reusable stuff is components, directives, and pipes. Has everyone used any of them? Do you use them frequently? Have you got any questions about them that you'd like to sort of discuss a little bit before we move on? I mean, component, if I very quickly run down, we talk about components in the form of kind of layout objects. So if you take shown in a minute material, they have cards, for example, to help manage a layout, to keep consistent on that. Form inputs, so if you want to have a date picker, you can build date pickers in there, or actions, so buttons and so forth. Directives, I mentioned a minute ago, so Google Maps, Analytics, Markdown might sit well as directives, and then pipes for kind of taking data and aggregating across it in the template, so currency, doing calculations like totaling up an array, those kinds of things are fairly popular for pipes. But is there anything anyone would like to share, or questions around any of those subjects, things you disagree with what's on there? Anything else that we're missing that you might want to sort of consider as being something that would be beneficial at a library?
Question.
Could you also put some utility functions in there?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So just a kind of vanilla functions rather than it being a component itself or a service.
Some business logic functions that multiple projects use the same. You could package together.
Yeah.
Logical.
Yeah, well, I'd probably consider those to be services maybe in most cases. There might be a service that you want to use to reuse the service, yeah.
Another one I like is like adapters. If you've got, say, if I say the adapter pattern, do people know what that is? So adapter pattern is where you usually have a class that accepts an interface. So you've got that contract, so it knows when it gets an object in, it's going to have certain methods on it, like get data or format data or whatever it is. And you might get loads of adapters. So like OAuth, for example, when you use certain, what's it called, Passport or something?
Passport, yeah.
You get different adapters to get to Facebook's OAuth, Google's OAuth. The logic inside might be slightly different, but their structure is the same. So in a library, you could have all your adapters, and people might add to them. So people might later on say, oh, here's an adapter for GitHub, here's an adapter for this. And then,
like, I suppose the closest thing, if you're an Angular developer and open object-oriented stuff generally, is interfaces is probably a form of how you might have an adapter set up to be an interface that you might then do a concrete implementation in your class.
Yeah. So that's quite useful. Sorry, you were going to say?
So, for the directives, the analytics, stuff like Google Analytics, and things like that, how that
Yes, so I've written a Google Analytics one. I mean, there are obviously some of these things are available in libraries. They're just some examples. Some of these already exist. You can go on the internet. You'll probably find some. I think the one I found when I was looking around for a Google Analytics one was last maintained about 2 years ago. So I thought, oh, I'll do a refresh for that. But you can literally have an attribute on a tag. So we do it on buttons, for example, or every time you hit a link, you can have something that says, okay, when I click that, call this directive, which is going to then send a message across with this event happened, this is what was clicked, so forth, that can be sent to Google, and you can capture every single one of those interactions then, which is great. So if you're building kind of an e-commerce type website where you really want to know where people are using, if they're trying to click on stuff that doesn't do anything as well, you can start trying to capture that. Oh, they clicked on this element, they clicked on that, doesn't do anything. Let's register the fact that people are trying to interact with these things. But yeah, you just have a directive. It can just be an attribute on your, well, if you're familiar with directives already, right? Yeah, they're just attributes that you put onto your tags.
We have some examples coming up as well.
Yeah, but not one particularly about the Google Analytics. But
True, no,
I think these are
simple
sort of
one,
good things that we could perhaps do a proper kind of how would you build one of those in the future if people are keen. Maybe do that as a stream rather than a meetup as well.
We do want to do some deep dives in certain areas. I think last time we spoke about, someone mentioned Cyprus, I can't remember if it was yourself or not, and someone mentioned some other things. So we do want to do some deep dives, so feed those back, please, and we can focus on certain areas.
Yeah, we can do some workshops on just building general directives.
Yeah.
There's plenty of opportunities. I mean, give us feedback. We're trying to build up what the things that everyone's interested in. So if we want to do a session on directives, we can do directives. We can do proper sort of stuff with analytics and
It's a great way for us to learn as well, because people bring up different challenges, different ideas, and it's always about improving and learning. Pipes is just some more examples. I think Pipes is a really good one because you can reuse those cross-project, like you were saying, with other services and like utilities. I think Pipes is one that you can really kind of move across between project to project.
And you can also nest pipes as well. I think that's something that people always forget is you can have a pipe that then does something and something else. You have one that truncates something, and then it can have an ellipsis after it. Or you can have to do it in one piece as well. There's lots of things you can try to think of a concrete example of one where you might try and reduce some data. You might have one that does a filter, the pipe that filters it down, and another pipe after the end that totals up the value of it. There's lots of things you can do with pipes.
You can even do asynchronous stuff with pipes, which I don't recommend because at the moment on my open source project, I'm having some challenges with the automated testing on Cypress because the Cypress waits for the page to load, and you've got resolves and so forth that block the page from loading until it's got the data that you want. So then test checks the page. Oh, I've got that. Oh, I failed because you can use a pipe to go get data asynchronously. But the problem is, Cypress doesn't wait for it. And yes, you can put in a wait, like, I don't know, 1 second, but that's really bad. So yeah, you can do lots of things with that, just bear that in mind. That's one thing we're going to change in our project.
So you don't recommend synchronous pipe yet?
Not asynchronous pipes, no. Yeah, I don't recommend it. It seems to work fine when you're using it as a user, but when you're trying to automate test it, it might work on my machine, it might not work on yours because yours is faster or slower or whatever. So it's just, yeah, that's giving us some problems at the moment. So yeah, I don't recommend that. I thought I was being really smart when I did it, but yeah, I wasn't. So has anyone used Angular, or anyone used Material? Yeah, Material, okay, so this looks familiar to you, the things you can do. What happened to the image that I put in there? I had a dog.
Didn't fit.
Yeah, okay, someone's been a bit sneaky, and I can see there's some text behind.
Yeah, it looks like something's gone on.
Left of what was mine. Okay, thanks. So yeah, just Material is a library that you bring in, and it has loads of components. I really highly recommend using it. I know Andrew's using it a lot less now.
I've moved on a little bit. I tried to build my own library, similar to that's how I first got into building my own libraries with Angular, was because Material was great, but then you go and work for a client and they go, but that's not my brand. So it's great to get you started prototyping activities, or if you are building an app on an Android device or something like that, where it's very much the Android kind of mantra to design. People do love it when they first see Material, don't get me wrong, you can wow people, go, oh wow, you click the button, this big wave goes across, fantastic. But then most people go, but that's not my brand. So you can either then write over the top of it, but then you've still got that underneath, and now you're putting something on the top, and this wrapping stuff is never the best move. I mean, I think Covalent is an example where they use Material, and then they wrap on top of Material, trying to put their own brand in there, and you can see that it brings some problems with it.
Has anyone used Covalent before? So it's really fancy. It's like Material on steroids, and it is Material underneath. And I used it for one of my other projects, but the problem I had was it didn't move as fast as Material. So although it had all these extra fancy features, some of the basic features like Flex, it was using Flex from Material 1, not from the new version. So it was a bit weird. So it is good, more for prototyping than actual for a production product. So again, coming back to Andrew's point, having your own. And you can pull in what you need. You sometimes pull in buttons or other bits. Or
yeah, I mean, I'm still
okay.
using Angular's CDK. So the CDK that sits alongside when they made Material, I'm quite familiar with it for the...
Do you want to talk what CDK is, actually?
Yeah, so I mean, you can see there's a link on here.
So what's the difference between the components?
What they call the component development kit. And it comes with, gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head what all the things are now.
But it's
you have things
more
like the
than-
ability to do virtual scrolls, so they have little scrolling panes. You have literally little dialogue pane helpers to bring up a dialogue on the page. You have to build some of those interactions.
But it's more the components, and correct me if I'm wrong, the
Yeah.
components are more kind of ready to use, whereas the CDK is more the building blocks to build your own components. So, for example, like the sidebar, so we have, our client wanted a sidebar to slide out, and you have a sidebar here, but they wanted data to continue to change in it, whereas a sidebar only accepts data once, and you can't have any real-time data in it. So, Andrew, using the CDK, used the building blocks to build a sidebar, but then was able to customize
And
it to...
inject the data dynamically in and out of it, yeah.
But it's a lot more work than just using the components, just bear that in mind.
So yeah, if you're new to it, by all means have a go with material first. That's probably the best place to start and get a feel for what you can build. Have a look at their open source code, give that a go. But if you want to go straight into the deep dive, I think that's probably what we're pretty much on to next, is
Nice.
writing your own stuff. So again, just for those that haven't built a component with Angular before, this is kind of the template of getting something started. You would generally start with the component syntax. So this is Angular saying this is going to be a component. You provide it with 3 things. So the first one is this selector, and that's going to be what you use on the HTML. So over here you've got an example of using it. We're going to use that code models example that matches to this selector to find it on the HTML to say this is what we want to use. And then you have 2 more. You have a template HTML, so this is the HTML you want to execute. So when I call that code models example, it's going to actually present it back like this as a button in effect. And this ng content, we'll talk about that in a second. And then the style, how do you want to style it with? So we haven't got an example, but that's really a standard CSS file that can style up this button however we want. So that will tie it all together. And one of the good things with a component is it encapsulates all that as well. So it doesn't bleed out to the rest of the page. So whatever you name your styles as in here will stay within this world unless you explicitly tell it not to. There's always that option that you can explicitly say, actually, you know what, it can bleed out. And that can have unusual effects. I try to make it as unusual as possible to ever do that, but there are rare occasions where you need to.
The equivalent's like exclamation mark important on your
Yeah.
CSS. You never want to use it, but occasionally if you're using a third-party library you don't control, you might have to do it. But yeah, it's something you don't really want to do.
So that's the core crux of building up a component as far as just having a component in Angular. So we just want to cover that one off.
Does this look
Any
familiar
questions?
to everybody? Yeah, everyone who's, I guess,
Anyone want to know what
Angular.
ng content does?
Oh, ask.
Yeah.
No, ask.
I was gonna ask.
Go ask.
Does anyone know what ng content does? Anyone want to explain it?
It takes
Yeah.
the text from that component, and replaces it in the engine content, and access its structural directive.
Drops it into there. Yeah. So this is a normal template directive. The structural directive is like an ngIf.
That's it, it's
Yeah.
a normal template.
But yeah, you're perfectly correct. Yeah. So whatever's inside, whatever I define inside that code models example tag, it will pick all of that up. So that could be a whole lot more HTML in there. It doesn't have to just be some text. It could be a whole lot of stuff, and it will put it straight into here. And there are some other advanced things to do, like you can have an attribute on here called select. If there was HTML in there, I could select out the H2 tag and just put the H2 tag in this place. And then down here, I can put a P tag later on if I wanted to. So there's things like that you can do as well with ng content. So a useful thing to be aware of. Normally people, when they're starting out with making components, are aware that you can do that kind of stuff to grab the content.
Out of curiosity, when people write components in a normal Angular project, do they do it manually? Do you create the files you need, or do you use ng-generate? Oh, you do? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We're a bit weird. When we were putting that in today, I was like, I never used that. I don't know why.
Links it to the module. That's
It does also add it to the module for you.
It does. And I always forget to use it, but I should.
I suppose it depends how complex the project starts to get, because we tend to put lots of things in modules these days. We can talk about how we structure things another time, but once you start having lots of modules, you've got to remember which module is it I want to tie it to, what's the name. You can start searching around. By the time you search around, you might as well have written the file to remember which one you want to go to, but it depends on sometimes the size of the project.
And there is one thing we have to mention later on when we come to the library part, that there's a bug in the ng-generate for the library, which we found today. So we were using the commands as an example, but that's not working. And it put it in the module, but didn't export it, and we'll show that later on. So if you are
You can
using
do it as a test so you can figure out what's done.
I've given it away now.
That's
So,
fine.
Yeah, it does everything apart from the export, which is just one little thing that I was like, why is this not working?
Or we believe the reason is because they made the ng-generate component to be for a project, not for a library, where in a project you're consuming and using it, whereas in a library you want to export it back out as well. So there's just that slight difference that it's not, doesn't seem to be aware of and doesn't manage that one for you. But.
Next one. Directives. Does this look familiar to people?
Talk about directives.
I like director. I'll do the next one. I'll do pipes. Okay, you want a break? I've just noticed this one's got an import, and the last one didn't. But yeah, we kept some imports and some didn't. We've kind of spoken about directives already, really. Here's the example usage on the right.
It's a slight difference in how the selector works. So beforehand, we've added now these square brackets around, right? What does that mean?
I can't remember. What does it mean?
Do not sure. Yeah, there we go.
It's what, sorry?
You can use it as
Attribute select.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's a CSS selectors effectively. So whatever you put inside there are effectively CSS selectors. I've never tried to use anything more too advanced in there. I don't know if it would work for like first child or something, probably not. But yeah, the core kind of CSS selectors.
Well, we've got our little demo project, so later on at the end, if we've got time, we'll give that a go and see, actually. So, I mean, this looks familiar. It's very similar to the component, but it's got a different annotation. It's pretty the same. It will pass in the information on the constructor, and you can do what you kind of want with it. That's not an interesting example, really.
Yeah, that one there is just straight out of the documentation. We're trying to come up with a really short example of directives. Most directives get quite big. We thought we can't think of one that's really short, and then we thought
you came up with a markdown one. He was like, right. I was like, no, this is too complicated. You can't fit this all on one page.
Yeah, so it's just trying to show that you can basically attach yourself to that element and do stuff with the element.
Yeah. Any other examples of directives, actually?
I think I mentioned one, structure.
Structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's effective.
It is, yeah, if and for
That
loops.
changes the overall mix it sometimes.
Ye- Yeah, so with a structural directive, you have the star. So you get star ngIf or star ngFor, whereas this is not, a structural one.
I've used one for permissions where
Okay.
the directive might hide or show the content based on
Yes. Permissions is a great example. In fact, we had someone ask that question on our Slack channel. If you're not on the Slack channel, yeah.
Yes, that's true. Join
Yeah,
us
it
like
was in the room.
Oh yeah, it was. Yes, it was. That was a good
We're gonna have to
conversation,
keep
actually.
short.
How did you do it in the end? Wait, let's get the microphone.
Yeah,
I
we've
mean,
got the
you remember
microphone now.
everything. You
What was
forgot
the
the
solution?
microphone.
What was the problem? What was the solution?
Yeah, go on. Is that on?
Well, the problem was to make enable or disable actions depending of the user roles, but the actions may need the user to have certain combinations of roles. So not just a single one, but maybe the user has to be administrator and be part of sales, or be manager and part of other team. So we end up using a service that checked inside a tree of the a map really that which is key was the action to perform, and the values were a list of the combinations of roles that enables that action. So calling with the action processes that list of roles required and answers if the action is able or unable to do.
And then you use the directive to call that service. So the directive was configuring what was the area and what was the team as such.
No, we didn't use the directive, just calling the service by the method.
Cool. It's all working okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll ask you next time as well. You can see how it's triggered. I find with these things they continually
They
improve,
evolve.
evolve. Yeah. Cool. Pipes.
Again, we talked about it. This is just how you would code a pipe.
Yeah.
Slightly different. I mean, in this, we just give it a name. We're not kind of having selectors anymore. And the name will be what you write on the HTML. So again, an example in the HTML on the side here. I've got a sentence, hello world, which is 11 characters long. I'm going to truncate it to 10, so the D would be lost if I was to run that. And you just run this pipe transport. So you have to implement, so what Ellie was mentioning a minute ago, you've got to implement this concrete thing, which requires you to have this transform method in here. The signature, you can keep going as long as you want. You can keep adding more and more attributes, but you have to have at least one input value to it. And then some sort of return type. So this one is just literally splicing the text to reduce it down. But,
Look familiar? People used pipes before? Yeah.
Cool. We could have gone really, really deep into stuff.
Yeah, we're doing quite well on time. This is good. Okay.
Okay. So we're going to do something real, but first, do we want a 5-minute break?
Yeah, let's have a bit of a break. We'll get a drink, comfort break, and then we'll get into some actual. Andrew's going to get some coding. I want to sit down and take a break. Right?
I'll swap over and get myself set up.
Yeah, cool.
Take 2 seconds.
Awesome. Let's take 10, whatever. 10. What time is it
Just
now?
a couple of minutes, whatever you need. We can get started again as soon as everyone's sat back down.
Yeah. Cool. I might get a drink as well. Do you want anything?
Okay, for a minute. I'm just going to check I've got all the right screens. I'm on the internet.
How do we get out? Actually, let me turn off the camera. Hey, I'm just taking a 10-minute break before we get into the detailed stuff. Yeah, cool. Cheers. This is my lab. I want to go to the toilet, but I'm trying to think how to turn it off. I want to turn off this one.
Triggering memories of my front end.
Well, hopefully this will get even more going in a second. We see some code on the screen.
Doing CSS and HTML.
Oh, yeah, well, certainly when you're writing raw JavaScript and stuff, there's so much is like jQuery. I think you're around jQuery.
Yeah.
What about yourself? You do development or language development?
What do you mean?
What sort of areas are you coding?
Mostly Angular. They also have experience with React.
Okay. Which one do you prefer?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
If you have a really small project and you don't need such heavy functionality, you just can add several libraries to use. So you can use React and just check because project where there was currency rates changing basically. So React working on action is like just specific case. But I would say corporate specifications, having these hours and all the functionality outside environment.
Yeah, well, it's just a lot of people are talking about it. They talk about React. They love React. And they only love it as far as doing a prototype to get something started. The problem is by the time they've shown people the prototype, people just want to keep moving forward. They don't want to necessarily are we using the right tool sets and so on, which always causes a bit of trouble.
React is like if you want to write a really big stuff, it's like learning.
Well, certainly when you start using Redux and stuff as well, it seems like it's putting a lot of logic into one place. And
Yeah.
it becomes dumping around for everything as well. Which, yeah, doesn't help with a big project.
So mostly Angular, sorry.
Yeah.
For you, also Angular, yes?
I've been using Angular since basically the day it went into the release, so about 2 years ago now. It's main release. Yeah, so I dealt around with it when it was on Dart as well, because we were going Dart as well, so they try it out when it was on Dart.
Is that
They made it so Google has their own internal language Dart, and then it's TypeScript as well. So eventually they decided Dart was not being picked up enough by people to understand, and they wanted to break into a bigger group. I suppose they cared about Microsoft. Well, let's use TypeScript. Well, I'll develop TypeScript with you, and you use that within the Angular project. But I'm not sure Dart's even an option anymore in Angular. I don't think it is. I think they supported it very early days when it first released, and they really pitched it. So.
as far as I know, that just used for not this kind of change detection strategy.
Okay, yeah. Which is great if you're building your own inputs and stuff to decide actually go on and do it. I decide to do it, or but I allow Angular to just choose to check through all the methods, all the changes. depends what you're doing. Things like drop downs and stuff is very good for people. It's certainly room because I do a lot of managing myself. You're one of our advanced students. You can tell you can do it mental afterwards.
Oh, no.
It's not too difficult. Yeah, I assume everyone in the room. Has anyone actually tried to make a library yet, Reactor? Yeah. How did you find it? Yeah. It's one of those. Everyone seems a bit scared because it sounds scary. But
It's kind of like a.
You'll see it's about 5 minutes of what we do.
Yeah, because you implement it like a component the same way you put tag, like
Yeah.
the only thing is that it's decoupled from the rest of the application. You don't, all the npm packages are contained inside of it, so it's still not 100%
Yeah, well, hopefully we can ask a few questions.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the basics and then what would anyone like to know from done before, you've got specifics and jump on this and we'll see how we can do.
Okay.
Otherwise we'll just build up something
I think
simple.
the main one was just how to get obviously the data in.
Okay. Let's see if start with answer, we don't need it, do we?
You just leave it in.
Right, I think Eddie's just on his way back. So, how many are still outside? I think it's just 2, right? Eddie and, yeah. There's not really a clean way of moving from one to Yeah, we found it was really much quicker. We had a big project, and they were really keen about rewriting it. And we looked at it and we said, look, I think you're going to just end up being in a big mess if we don't rebuild it. And it actually only took about 2 months to do the full rebuild with just half of the teams. We had half the team doing that, whilst others sort of pushed forward on other things, trying to minimise the change to the front end. But yeah, it was much cleaner to just start from.
3 months or so, but because you see all of the code in one place rather than incrementally building it, so you see how much you can optimize just by.
But the great thing as well is once you've already got an existing project, rather than building something new, you've got a reference point. So it becomes so much quicker to just go and you can compare and go, right, and chunks of code you can borrow straight over as well. So it's not as scary as it sounds, I suppose. But it really depends on the scale. I mean, if you've really got a massive project, you've been spending sort of the last 8 years since Angular 1 was around, building it up, then that would be quite a scary thing to do probably, yeah. Cool. Right, Eddie, you ready?
Yeah, what we're doing?
You're coding.
How to code.
This isn't really code, this is just telling a CLI what to do. So, building a library is not as difficult as it sounds by any means with Angular. In fact, we're going to spend most of our time probably just building a few components. Setting up the library is going to be quite quick for us. But it all starts with ng new to make a new project. So by all means, if you've got a laptop you want to follow along, you can do. I'm not necessarily going to stop too much, but if you want to stop me, then please do. I'll just call this, what do you want to call it, Eddie? Give me a name.
Demo project. That sounds really exciting, right?
Call it demo lib for the library part. There we go. Cool. We don't need a, so you'll notice there is a command you can use that will ditch putting the normal project in. I'm leaving it in there, and the reason being that if you do leave it there, similar to places like Angular Material, you can build your documentation for your library as well. So certainly for our branding projects, we have documentation to go with it, so when a new developer comes in, they can see the docs for how that branding library actually gets used, rather than having to find reference points within the code. So it's nice to leave the original one in there, but you can also just ditch having the main project in there.
I love it that people are following along. That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's good. So that gives me an initial Angular project. I can go into that now, and I can see all the files I'd see. So if you were with us a month ago, you'll have already done this step where we did a new project. We have something there. To add a library, this is where you have to remind me, it's generate lib, right?
But just to add what you were saying, if
generate library, and we'll call it, I'm just going to call it lib. Doesn't nothing, actually, let's go demo. No, design.
Just to add what you're saying
More
to your
meaningful.
command before, if you're not going to put the docs in that project, then do use the flag, which is, it's in the docs, it's also on there.
Yeah, you might have to check the Angular.
Like minus create skeleton equal false or something. Like if you're not going to have any like kind of web app in there, then just keep it really lightweight. But we put docs in there, and it's quite useful. So when you run up the project, you can just see how to use the library, the components. It works quite well.
So at this point, I have two options. I can hit npm start, and it would start up the main project, but I wouldn't see the library in there. What I want to do is I actually want to build the library. So to build the library, it's the standard ng build command, but now I'm going to pass in the name of the library I use, which I call it design at the top, so ng generate library design. It's created a library, and I can do an ng build with just calling it design. The other thing you can do to this as well, so normally if I'm going to work on a project locally, a library locally, I want to have changes and be able to take that in my main app. So we're going to build a second app to go with this in a second, and we're going to pull the changes as then we make them to the library through to the main app. So I'm going to add on to this -- watch. So you can do that with ng build normally, but it'll just watch the changes in this library. Okay, so that's starting up. And whilst that starts up, I'm just going to jump to another tab. So it's already started, it's pretty quick. And I'm going to do another ng new now, and I'm going to create our main application. So I'll say ng new my app, or my project, to avoid the naming that Angular tends to use. I don't mind this time, we'll have routing this time. SCSS still, that's fine. So now I've got two projects effectively. One which I'm going to use as my library, and one which is going to be my application. So we'll do some work within the application. We're going to pull the library in, and I'll show you how to pull the library into your project. So we're literally going to be done, as I said, in 5 minutes on the actual getting the library going. We can then start just trying a few things out and seeing what happens. Okay, there we go. Right, so I can now do an npm start in here. Oh, if I go into the directory first, that will help. Okay, give that a few seconds. Do you want to do the next bit, Eddie?
No, I've forgotten what I have to do. I don't know how to
So I think I have probably skipped one step as well, so let's just open this up and I can show you what the step is I skipped. So, source. I'll just open both of these. You see I'm still using WebStorm. I know last time I said I'll get VS Code up and running, but Eddie hasn't found me the right plugins yet.
Who here uses, well, what do you use for ID? VS Code?
VS Code.
Everyone VS Code?
I use both. Use Code.
Okay, any reason why?
In the company I work in, we use Microsoft and IntelliJ.
So I used IntelliJ for ages, and then I've kind of slowly moved over to VS Code. It's kind of lighter weight. I can have like 4 or 5 of them running, whereas with IntelliJ, if you've got like 4 or 5 of those running, it's quite a monster. It does. But I do find that there are some nice features in WebStorm or IntelliJ that VS Code doesn't quite have. Maybe I haven't got the right plugins yet. Sometimes get some underlines. I know things are correct, and you run it and it builds.
So the first command, we did an ng new to make a new project, and the second command was an ng generate library, and then we gave it a name. I called it design. And then I went to a new tab and then made a new project as well. So we said there's 3 commands I've run so far. ng new to make the first project, then with ng generate library, and then gave it a name, design. And then I made the second project, which is this one. So ng new my project is what I call it. So you can see the project's up and running. It's not currently using my library, so there's no reference to it. So one of the things I'll need to do is go in and reference it now. If I had deployed to npm, so it comes again built in with the package R and stuff when you create the library. So you can do an npm publish from the project. In fact, I'm going to have a look. We should have the code into here, so we should see in this package JSON. Is it npm publish? It does put it into here, doesn't it?
It does. It puts it.
I thought it put it in automatically. I don't remember having to do it myself. No, you might have to add the npm run publish yourself.
Is this the library one? It does put packager in as a dev dependency.
I might be forgetting it. Sorry, I always do my publish from my CI, so when trying to remember what the command is I did it once the first time I set it up, and then probably reuse that script over and over every time for the CI to do it. But I can't remember if you have to put it into your package JSON or if npm publish will work straight out. But it does include packager as well.
Yeah, dev dependency.
Down here, the dev dependency. It will do an npm deploy for you to make it available. But we haven't done that. So instead I want to reference it locally. So to reference it locally, I go to my project, so the one I've created that I want my application to be.
Why do you not want to publish it when you're developing?
Well, for starters, this is a demo environment. It's not like something I want to leave out on NPM because there's no way of deleting from NPM anymore. You used to be able to. I think you've got to actually send them a message these days, explain exactly why you want it deleted. It becomes very convoluted because obviously a couple of years ago someone removed a core library and broke, I don't know, thousands of projects for about 24 hours because the core library that everyone was depending on got deleted off NPM. So you can no longer delete off NPM, so that's one reason. Oh, really? I think if it's a private project, you can. Yeah, so private you can, yeah. So I could create a private repo and do it through that, but I like to keep everything public, so I'm not paying NPM for private ones.
But then you cannot upload another project with the same name within
yes,
several days.
It blocks it out for a little while, yeah, so you've got to get creative sometimes. Yeah.
The reason why I was alluding to that, I was just going to say that when you're developing, because you're making changes in your library all the time, you don't want to keep publishing. Even if it was a published library, you don't want to keep publishing and so on. If you don't want people to see all your changes. So Andrew's going to show you how to reference it locally, so it's just like, it's almost like it's in the same project, like it's there.
So it's fairly simple.
Not quite, but almost.
Obviously, normally I would have an actual NPM project name in here, and it would probably be the one that I've got from my other project, the library project. Because typically, what you should be doing is in this here, this package should be giving it the name you want to deploy it as. So if I was actually doing this for real, I would probably be calling this something like CodeMortals/design, and that would become the CodeMortals design when it goes up to NPM. But when I'm referencing it locally, I can actually call it whatever I like. I'm going to use the same name just for now, so I'll use CodeMortals/design here. And now to reference it, I'm just going to reference it locally. So I need to go up a directory to find it. And then I'm going to go into the project, which I called, was it demo lib? Double check, yeah, demo lib. And then it's design. So we'll then go into the dist folder. So again, if I just go back to this project, you'll see there's a dist folder here, a design folder. So that's where it's created the bundle that can be used. That would be what got sent to NPM normally. So I can reference the dist folder and then /design. And I can save that. So that's one part, is to reference the project so it becomes a dependency, it's available. The second part, because I want to pick up the live changes as the project changes, in Angular JSON, you need to also locate the architect build options section. And we add another one in here called preserve symlinks. This is why I like WebStorm, it finds them all for me. We have to add that one in. So that will allow, when changes occur, it will remember where they are and pull them through correctly. So those are the two things you need to do to be able to run it locally.
This one you can commit, but the other one in package JSON you don't want to commit, because you'll actually want to include the actual proper reference to on NPM.
Yeah, so when you're making the changes locally, obviously, if I was to commit that package JSON now and deploy it to my CI, it's never going to find that local reference because it hasn't got that project. So I need to make sure it references the normal kind of version 1.0.0 or whatever I've deployed out to NPM. I need to install it now. So now that I've added it to NPM, because I didn't do it from the command line, I need to install it. So I'll just let that run for a moment. It'll pull in the one locally. It's obviously checking all the other dependencies too.
And then this is when the fun starts happening.
And now I can do an NPM start again. Okay, now when we created the library, Angular kindly gives us demonstration. So it actually has inside the lib folder here an initial design component, which they've called lib design as their selector. So what I should now be able to do, without too much difficulty, let's open up the page again. So I've got the page, let's just refresh it, make sure it's not broken. Yeah, it's still working, that's a good sign. I should now be able to go into the app for the main project, delete everything that we're seeing there. So not quit, let's delete. And save that. So if I save that now, the page goes blank. Great. And then I should be able to say I want to use the lib design one. This is another one thing I love about WebStorm. It's found that where that actually lives, and it wants to add that into the Angular module because it knows how Angular works. So I can just do this. If you look, what it also does in the Angular module, it's added the design module into here for me, which is quite nice. So it's one of the few selling points I can probably give WebStorm still. Now if I do go back to my page, files will save, and there it is, design works pulled through from the library. So that is as easy as that to get something started. And from there, I can obviously now start building up my design package. So do you want to come in with anything at this point?
Does anybody want to come up and put something in? Come on, pair with us. What would you like to put into our library? Into our library, as in all of us.
Well, let's do the one we said a minute ago about when we create one from the generator, it doesn't do it properly. I'll show you.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay.
So if I go back, I'll tell you, I'll use WebStorm's command line. So if I go into here, I can say now, ng generate, let's just do a button, yeah? So we'll call it button.
I have to put
and we put the name project. Oh, sorry, yes.
ng generate button, a component button.
I'm too busy thinking ahead, making sure I don't forget to put the project bit on the
end.
end.
That's why we pair program, right?
Yeah, cool. So yeah, I would say ng generate component button, and then what the project is, which is the design project. Here we go. Give that a second. So up here now, I should see a button has appeared in the lib folder. It has added it to the design component, so you can see it over here in the design component. It's not the best of formatting when it does it, but there it is, the button's there, but it's not put it into the exports. So that's the bug as such. So if anyone wants to submit a fix to Angular for that, or raise it as a problem, I think there are tickets raised about it.
It was raised on the 16th of January 2009, as I discovered today. I was using the CLI, and no one seemed to have fixed it, so that's something on my to-do list. But if anyone wants to speak me to it, or pair on it, I'm more than happy to.
So I can just add that in as another one.
Could do that as a live stream, maybe, fixing it.
So we've got the button. Again, they just put some default stuff in there. Let's make it more interesting. Let's do the one that was on the demonstration. So we can say button. We can just put in the ng content. Get sent in. And now I can go back across to my project.
Our project.
Our project. And we can add the button in. So
it is called my project, I suppose.
How did we give it a name? Let me check the selector on this. Bit button, yeah, cool. Click me. How about that? Hopefully I saved everything. Cool. There it is. I have a button with click me on it, but nowhere in this is it defined to be a normal HTML button. It's pulling that through from the library. I can prove that further because we can style that button up now. And we can say, right, let's give that button, I don't know, let's give it a load of padding, shall we? Just prove it's working.
And this is in the lib project, just to clarify as well.
Yeah, so I'm still in the lib project. It's always difficult to jump around between them a little bit. So lib, demo lib. If you want to know which project I'm in ever, okay.
You should have warned me. We've got a video of you jumping up and down.
Yeah, that won't happen again for a while. Cool. Right. So let's make it slightly bigger font. Bit of padding. Give it a second to refresh, and bigger button. So of course we can now reuse that wherever we want. I could start another project up now, get the exact same button into another project. As many projects as I like.
So if you have microsites, this is really useful. Microsites that have maybe the same design or the same brand as we spoke about earlier, then you can just include this library and you can just have a button like that or a card or a table or whatever you're using, even more complicated stuff that are wrapping other components in your library. You can then just include it, pass the information you want, and you ever want to update it. It's kind of done.
Yeah, so the bigger the organisation, the bigger the company, you can have a dedicated team looking after the library, making sure it's dead perfect, it's got all the tests in there, rather than having one team having their own design library, another one having their own, another one having their own, and then one of them having a 2-pixel border and the other one's got a 1-pixel border and going, oh, the two are different. It drives the designers crazy, right? What else would you like to build? What we do? So I mean, that gets a library running. It was always going to be a quick section, but it was now the opportunity to, where would you like to go? What would you like to do next?
So one of the questions I have is how
Yeah.
do we communicate with the library to get in and out?
To put data in and out. Okay, so that's the quickest way of trying to do so. So obviously, Angular, have you used the input capability on Angular? Yeah, so the easiest thing to do would probably be, depends on what you're doing, would be to use an at input tag on here.
It's a good question.
We can send some data in. So
It's more real, so I think this is good.
I'll just call it public data. Obviously, there are other things so you can use this at inject as well, so which gets more common. I'm not sure I've got enough time and enough stuff stored in my memory to remember exactly how to use the at inject, but that is an alternative. But this could be an array of strings, let's say. I should probably change this from being called a button. I'll tell you what, before we do this, I'm going to make a brand new.
Make a new component.
Yeah, it's dead easy
Or does
to
someone
do.
else want to come up and make a new
Takes us 2
component?
seconds. We'll just call this a list. Ooh, I've already got a button one. You're going to get upset with me. I meant to hit delete, not enter. We'll call this a list, shall we? So, there it is. Close some of these other files. Okay, so let's do it in here. So we'll have an at input. We'll call it public data. And we're just going to have an array of strings. Okay. And we can just basically go straight onto here. And we can, I'll just format it with JSON for now. Data. Probably going to get upset because I probably need to import the common module now. Okay.
And don't forget.
Basically done the same way that components inside the project.
You can now do everything exactly the same way. That's sort of the point.
Except the export that you forgot to do as well.
You're probably right.
So it's
Went
all
about
the
it.
same, except it doesn't put in the export. To export it out to...
No, I do want to put that.
yeah, that's the only thing you have to do different.
Okay, so that's built out, but I'm not using it yet, so let's go and use it. So let me create within this component another value. Just have a public, I'll say my data over here. We'll just put an array of, what do you want, names?
Yeah. Microsoft, Google.
Eddie,
Okay, those sort of names.
Microsoft. Oh, I can't spell Microsoft, so they're going to get upset with me doing that on their stream. Google.
It's still wrong.
Is it? That's right now, isn't it?
That's
Microsoft.
okay.
So I can try and make the font size a bit bigger. There we go. That'll do that. We don't need too many names, do we? Just want to prove a point that it goes through. So I can now call in the lib list. Because I've not actually built it, it's not coming through. And then we say data. And this is going to be square brackets. We're going to send an actual data through. And with any luck, there's some JSON on the page.
So what does the public API mean? because I saw on the file there, and I was thinking it has something to do with it.
Sorry,
Oh, yeah.
this one here.
Yeah.
It just
So
makes-
this is saying, what am I actually making available to other people? So there might be some things inside your project that you want to still keep contained in there. Like I might have a service in here. I don't want to actually export that service out. I want to keep that private. So these are what the library is going to expose to other projects to use. So you specify typically modules. I don't tend to do it with components and so forth. I normally put a module in and say, export that module. So in fact, when I was writing each of these, I'd probably have inside here a module for list and a module for button, and then in here there would be one that says lib list module and lib button module, and they'd all be listed out one after the other.
So if you remove that, you will be able to...
Yeah, so if I take that module there out, it's probably all going to break and complain at me. Let's have a look. That's
So you can still keep what you want private.
Yeah.
Oh, it won't even let the build go through. Can't determine the class for that. Cool. I'm sure that one means. It's not happy. It's not happy about it anyway.
We don't want to break it.
Yeah, it wouldn't work if that wasn't there. I think it's probably because somewhere else is. What else would be used?
It would be referred to in the module maybe itself as well. But yeah, we don't want to break things anyway.
But yeah, you don't have to expose everything.
I have a question. This demo lib is the project.
Yeah, so DemoLib, I made that as the project for Angular New. I didn't have to scaffold it with all Angular stuff. I did just because out of natural, what I'm used to doing, create a source folder. Because inside here, I can still use the exact same stuff, right? I can still come into here and say, actually, let me stop the other project. So if I was to stop this one, go back to here, and do an npm start on this one. Yeah, that should be okay. Then I can go into here and delete all of that and say I want to use the lib design one in here as well. It'll give me a couple of options.
So when we
use that
have
one
a
in this
third-party
case.
library, we usually use this part just for documentation of the library.
Yes, I could put something in here saying we have button, and then how do you use it? We'd probably write some documentation saying what you do with it, why use the button, ... And I didn't put any content inside it, did I? Probably helps. We could put some default stuff in there.
Do you see this as like a similar to storybook? Like how do you use it?
I haven't used Storybook, so I can't say. But I don't know if anyone else has.
What else?
Yeah, how do you...
Storybook just gives you a way to go through the library and components. So it's like a visual representation of it, and it allows you to put into states that normally wouldn't be able to run in the project. So you could have like button, and then you could say button is disabled, it'll just show it disabled. You could do button is like different colors or different sizes,
Okay.
and you manipulate it, and allows you to test it in certain ways you might not even get to.
Sure.
By coding.
So it's not as advanced as that. This is more just showing you maybe an example usage, a bit like the documentation for, if you bring up material, it will be something like that. So in the material docs, it will give you examples of how to use this. And that's more what we use that part for. But if you're not going to put your docs into your library, then when you do ng new, you put the minus, I can't remember the exact thing, we can put it up in the documentation, but basically equals false to not build it as a project because you are just using it as a library, so you won't get that source directory.
Oh, okay, I probably missed that bit.
Yeah, so if you, examples, or you click on API, for example, maybe. Again, it's just the second tag of a lot. So you could write docs like this on how to use each one of your components, but it's your choice. It's just an Angular app with static information.
A Material use their own library, obviously, to actually write their docs. So everything that you're doing inside here, Material has available. This is a table, Material has a map table that you can use. So they're using their exact components to build their documentation as well, which is quite nice.
Yeah. Cool.
Question.
We've got time, so let's.
That was far quicker than I
Did
thought it
people?
was going to be.
That's good. It's usually the other way around. Last time, I think we were going for just over 2 hours, and we were getting chased out of the building. We wanted to finish off what we were doing. We didn't quite finish off everything either. So yeah, this time we've got more time, so people can get coding. And we can come around and help, and code on your own projects, or try and do this, whatever you wish. Or if you have questions, just fire it out at us.
Yeah, if you want to see us make a directive for Google Analytics, we can do that.
He speaks for himself. I'm too tired for that.
Eddie's going to do this one.
I have a question. So
Yeah, sure.
If I had like an annual project and I wanted to move some part of it into the library, how hard would it be? So like, for example, I'm currently making a profile, like say things like LinkedIn packet, right? And say if I wanted to brand that differently, if I wanted to have a profile as a library, would that be something that's okay to have in there?
Yeah, I mean, some of it might depend, as far as when you're saying how difficult is it, depend like how you set your project up. So if I've got my main project here, and I've got inside here another module, so call it profile, why not? So if you've just got a component in here, I should have done it with...
I was just thinking, we didn't use the CLI, we learned that today. We're a bit old-fashioned.
I am. But yeah, I could have a component in here, etc. And I might have, I won't write too much in there, just go templates. And then if I had, I need to export that as well, export class. So if I had this and there was a module in here as well, so this was a profile module to go with it. We declare our profile component. And that there should be the crux of us having a module, and that there is all self-contained. I can literally drag and drop that to the other project and then call it back through. All I need to do is add into here some sort of selector to find it with. Because at the moment I didn't have a selector, so I might have been loading that with some router instead. So I'd have to give this a name, call it app profiles.
So the answer is yes. If it makes sense, yeah, do it.
So if I had this in like one version inside the library, but actually another library copy of the same thing, then would I style it differently? How would you like do the styles?
Yeah, so this is where I'd probably look to have two projects. So I'd have two of these. There'd be, well, it could be in one project, to be fair, because you can have multiple projects inside one. So I could go in here and go ng generate library design 2, for example. And now I'd have another one in there, and I could then get the same test suite. So that's how I'd probably link the two together, would be to have two test suites, well, one test suite, but two libraries that has to pass for both test suites to make sure that functionality-wise, everything's consistent, but the style-wise, it's different, and they could show things and present things in different orders. We can rearrange how it appears on the page, potentially. But as long as functionally, this is where you have to be thinking about the functional side, not the visual side, more when you're doing your tests.
So CSS would be different.
CSS could be different. The HTML even could be to a degree different, as long as it doesn't break your functionality requirements. Yeah. So you might be less strict about expecting the title to come before the content. Maybe you might just say, so long as there is a title and there is some content. Yeah. Yeah, obviously, and then you're down to more probably your application tests to make sure visually it looks correct from a visual perspective.
And it depends on your selectors. If you have your selectors of one classes, then it doesn't matter where the header comes, because then it would select the header.
Of course,
on
yeah,
whatever. So it depends on how strict you are with those. So I think you can still make it work and it still be efficient and effective, and you can get the best out of it.
Otherwise, you could look at how Material does its themes, for example, as well, and go down that path, which is interesting, don't get me wrong, but you're then mostly limited to doing things with colours, font sizes, much more restrictive over how far you can really take. Depends how far you need to go. For most projects, probably looking at the way Angular Material does its themes might be good enough, in which case they have multiple builds effectively, and there's a CSS file that gets generated for each build, and then it's just imports the correct CSS file for that project. There was another question.
Yeah, I had a question. So earlier you mentioned...
Is it design? No, you've got the source.
Here's your microphone.
Source
Just for a moment, Eddie, got a microphone. Just for a moment,
Yes, it
the
does.
microphone's
Right.
for
I'm looking
talking.
I'm looking at that one. It does. Oh, let me turn this off. Otherwise I'm going on
Hello?
the stream.
Okay, so yeah, you mentioned earlier that a good starting point would be the Angular Material UI, and you started there quite a few times and then moved over to this approach. So I guess I'd want to understand the pros and cons of either approach, right? Because you said there may be solutions that wrap Material UI to do other things.
Yeah.
So in theory, people that are consumers of this library would have to potentially do similar things, right? To make adjustments or amends to components to fit their needs. So what are the approaches that you found that worked well for that to happen? So maybe patterns around making components reusable, but also to be edited for different consumers' purposes, I guess. Does that make sense?
So you're trying to build a library for lots and lots of people to use. So a lot of them.
That it's flexible enough to where you don't run into the same problem where you've got a consumer within, say, your company that wants to use this, but then they have the same problem that you've had with Material UI, right? How do you avoid that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone's going to have different needs. So I have my own library that is public, so you can go find this. This one here. It's on the internet. It has various components built into it. I have things like date pickers, for example, and so forth. It's all built out, but all from scratch. But would many people want to use this? Maybe not. We're using it on the Code Model website to quick start some of our design on there. And at some point, we may well swap this out to be a Code Models project instead. Would I deem this to be generic enough? That's why I was saying that's why we might swap it out for something else, because how far do you want to go and invest on building it generically? If there was a big uptake for people saying, oh, I want to use this as well, but I need to better configure this and configure that, you have to start adding those in. That's where the community can help contribute and build it bigger for you potentially. Depends on the size of your team as well. So Material, they've got a dedicated team trying to build things that are flexible, but they've got a design mantra they're building it for. So they have that material design specification, and that is dictating certain things that can change and what the options are. So because they've had all that built in, it allows them to build something flexible. If you've got all of that and you've got the mentality, which I don't have the mind for that, I'm sure, then yes, you could build something fully flexible, I'm sure. But you're right, I haven't got this built for different colours, so at the moment it's one colour scheme, which is quite a purple-looking colour scheme at the moment. But this is all built from scratch by hand, it's all open source as well. So if you want to see how it's built, your own custom inputs and things, these are all custom made with error states and all sorts. I forget which one's got an error on it. So yeah, you can do all of that, but as you say, if you want to make it flexible, you're probably not going to. Someone just had to say, oh, this is the kind of design I'm after, like Bootstrap. They made it really easy for people to build a website in that design, because you could just drop and put those pieces in. But now you go to a website and you go, oh, that's using Bootstrap, that's using Material. You can identify where it's come from. You look at things like Zerb Foundation, though, where it's more of a CSS framework, and you can then extend off of that. It becomes much more different. It's very hard to identify that was with Zerb or that was something else, because they're less trying to dictate the design you're working with it. So it's a really complex question, and I suppose it depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to build a new design mantra, then yeah, just go ahead, just get started, I suppose, and see how much of an uptake there is for that. There's also things that different places won't have. I mean, it's not deployed out yet, but I have a time picker on here. Material doesn't have a time picker, so there's features that it's missing, and that's another reason I went down this path of building my own one, and likewise for other companies, I built their own ones for them, because it allows you to build things that Material doesn't have without trying to see how can I squash that into the Material design ethos. It's a very difficult ethos to build things into, certainly for a time picker. They have Material time pickers now, for example, and they're quite complicated, but the Material library doesn't have one of those. So you'd have to build a custom one yourself anyway. So which way do you want to go? Is it got everything you need to build it, like Bootstrap probably has these days, most things you want to build? Material is still missing lots of things, Angular Material anyway, that you might want to use, certainly if you're comparing it to the Material design spec. I don't have a dead set answer for you. It's really down to what your needs are. But I certainly found with most clients, the basics are there in things like Material, but what they really want isn't always there. And you end up having to go down your own path. Like, they don't want a dialogue to appear like this. They want it to fill the entire page. For example, when you click on something which is quite popular, having a full page lightbox rather than just a little dialogue come up. Everyone's different. Yeah, you can extend and wrap around Material, but I wouldn't recommend it. You get into a world of pain, certainly when they upgrade to the next version, and you're probably not supporting it, it's broken your stuff. it's quite a tight dependency to have.
Is it the same for Bootstrap as well?
I haven't used Bootstrap for a few years now. Have you got much recent experience with Bootstrap?
Like, is it the same kind of idea that Mortal wrap your stuff around Bootstrap or something?
I think Bootstrap is very similar to Material. So if you think it's good to wrap it, then if you Material Bootstrap is not much of a difference. If you think if it's bad for whatever reason or doesn't work for your project, then it's not going to work. You're going to have the same issues with Material or Bootstrap.
I think compatibility as they make changes. If they're making minor changes, it's probably not so bad. But if they start making some major changes, like you go from 3 to 4, you're now going to have to probably do a big swathe of upgrades to what you've done to maintain support and get the new stuff they've got available. But that's the trade-off, right? You've got to decide, would I rather manage and build my own up, and there's a lot of stuff there that they've built for you, or would I rather maintain the additional stuff that I've put on top? If you're doing a completely different layout and design, I'd probably say don't wrap it. But if actually you're only making small tweaks, like I don't want rounded corners, I want them to be square, then that's probably minor enough to say, yeah, wrap around it, that's fine.
It depends on the project timescale. If the client or the company you work for wants something quick and then you can customize off Bootstrap or off Material, then I recommend doing that, especially for a prototype. But if they want something very different and they have time to do something, then that has more longevity. I do agree. But you have to do all the accessibility stuff, and I know you get from Material or Angular, from Material or Bootstrap, you get a lot of the extra benefits of accessibility and all the other bits and pieces built in. So yeah, you got to weigh it up. I think it's worth trying both, at least for personal projects, and therefore you get kind of a bit of an idea of what they are rather than the theoretical side. I mean, it sounds like you've done both probably already. But yeah. Cool, how are we doing on time?
I was going to say, I can dig around in what I've done for this, but that's probably not that interesting. You can see it's all open source what's on here. But there's lots of options available. I mean, this has got things like the ability to run little bits of pagination and stuff, little paginators and things. You can build whatever you want, really. I wouldn't say these are the best darlings. I'm not a designer, but it allows me to have something that I can then build against and do more things in the future.
Yeah.
Build your own select crop. So this is using CDK to do the scrolling here, for example. So I've not built a scrolling window there. That's where the Angular CDK has come along to help. So certainly things like the CDK, if you're going to build your own library with Angular, I'd certainly say keep it there in the background. Even if you're not using Material, the CDK is great.
So you just start
That's all I've got in there is the CDK. There's no reference to anything else. The entirety elsewhere is custom made. Yeah. I think the only other library is Font Awesome for a few icons. So. Cool. Any more for any more? Or Eddie, have you got any more you want to? Oh, you're helping out. Otherwise, we can just have a general. I think we're done with the screen. Just have a chat around. If you've got any questions, you want to sit and look at a project, discuss anything.
Anything special you have to do to wrap the library and to publish into NPM?
No, I mean, there's a few things I'd say to bear in mind. If you want to publish to NPM, think about your versioning. We certainly have issues, or we did have issues, when we were keeping it all in the package JSON, say the next version could be this, because Eddie might commit up a new component, has a version number in there, but there's PR comments going on and it's not going to get merged yet. Someone else has come in, it's now bumped the number up already, so now the version number is coming. So we've moved away and we now use tags for it all. So when it tags, the CI picks up the tag number, injects that into the package JSON and deploys with the tag number. So it's things like that once you start to grow and you want to have more people working on it. But as far as actually releasing to NPM goes, as long as you've got an account on NPM, again, I put my NPM token in onto the CI, I can then say, right, NPM publish, pushes it out using my token. As long as there's not a version already up there with that name, it's deployed, anyone can use it. But yeah, there's nothing special. It all sounds quite scary, I think, when you've never done it before. That's the hard part. But once you give it a go, really, I mean, as I said, when Eddie said, let's do one about how to set up a library, I said, oh gosh, I don't think we're going to cover that in 2 hours. It takes quite a while. But actually, as you do it, you go, actually, it's only going to be about 5 minutes. We're going to struggle to think about what else to talk about. So we'll let everyone decide if there's certain things you want to look at so we can build more components, directives, you can see how that works. But I think you've hopefully got the gist. And by the sounds of it, most people in the room actually have done quite a bit with Angular anyway. So components, pipes, directives aren't necessarily the top thing on your list of how to learn. But by all means, if there are things you want to know more about, we could go into testing. But again, we're probably running a bit short on time now to go to move to testing. But.
There is one topic that I'm interested in, the energy project layout.
Okay, all right, cheers. Yeah, if you want to feel free to mingle, leave. I'll come and we can come and chat over here unless you want to shout out loud.
There's this NG template out there that really cool. So you can have a component where you can switch out the template depending on something like condition. So you can have I saw an example of the drop down box, and one of them had like sharks and swimmers in it, and then the other one had like stars and stuff. But it was the same component, but the engine template outlet was able to dynamically change it based on.
Yeah, I don't think I've used that specifically in a project. I'm just wondering if Eddie's done one like that. Eddie, he's helping out. I'll have to grab him in a minute. I've not done it myself. I have used NG template for things like if you obviously in a switch statement, for example, you use it there all the time. But I've not had to use template outlet yet.
Yeah, so I think usually else.
So you can do that as well for an else to hide things with a template using an else. I don't know.
It was that, but I don't think it was exactly that. It was a bit more. What do you think this is? There was one example I saw. I think it was actually at NGConf. I don't know if anyone went.
Yeah, I was going to go to NGConf, but I missed it this year.
If I go to NGConf, actually. So, I was here in England a few months ago.
Well, Eddie, what else do you want to add?
No, Angular. You want to see your package, I forget the class. This is the project. There we go, package.
Whilst you're looking at that, have you used ng template with outlets?
With
outlets, ng template outlets.
I don't know why I want to.
It sounds very similar to what in the SDK doing stuff with portals, maybe. But.
Yeah, he had. Yeah, this is the one. He had the GitHub thing somewhere. Yeah, so you got this swimming icon. And that's his drop down there. Function. Does a ternary for either one.
So see that.
So he's just showing, okay, so he's basically saying why not to just like have duplicate things. So he's saying it's already overly complicated.
Built it. Oh, Simulink.
Just trying to find a bit that was.
Go in the other file and preserve the Simulink.
Oh, so you're showing different ways of how to do it.
There was two things we have to do.
Okay, here we go. So ng template outlet, yeah.
Angular.json?
So you can take it's passing the template reference.
Okay, cheers. Thank you.
We have, where is it? Oh, here we go, this one here.
Yeah, he was able to do this implicit thing, and it just passes in the data available, and then the template into the one that's swapped out. So you can pass in like whatever options are available. So this is G4. So the option that you select gets put into that template. And you know, so basically it's like a list. It's able to change the template based on the option.
Because we're kind of faking it.
Shark, okay, yeah.
Which I think is really quite powerful.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, I'll have to have a look separate. I'm not sure I'm going to get it around it that fast, but it's an interesting idea to look at, yeah.
Let me see if I can find this. There we go, yeah. This Stackblitz, I think this is the one, yeah. So you have a Stackblitz ng template out and content.
got it there, in fact.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, I was looking at it. This is it. Yeah, this is it. So both the same component, but they can show different things depending on.
So they've got client 1 and client 2, I assume, is what he's passing in, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I was passing my selector to client 2. So he's got my selector and local sharp, so that's fine. And the so this is the individual position of the client. Client 2 is the same thing. Okay, and then I think he's got selector. Yeah, this is it.
That's right, he's got both. It's combined.
He's got different template outlets there.
And this one was.
So template ref is obviously something you're configuring in yours in here.
In here, I think, and then it's basically like a reference to that specific.
Just wondering where he's pulling in, because I can't see him pulling in the actual what you're seeing in the drop down on the HTML.
Oh, that's inside the HTML. Isn't that the HTML? But it's client 2, yeah, the track.
So it's in client 2,
that's
yeah.
It, to the energy template. That's what.
Okay, so he's pulling in from there. Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense? But I thought that was quite cool.
Yeah, it's
Might be a good one too.
No, absolutely. Because if you can certainly get, if someone wanted to say, actually, I want to just build my own one of these, and I want to inject that into the library. So the library is managing this part, but you can inject how you want each row to look.
Exactly. And it
Yeah,
more
that makes
customization.
sense.
So I guess that might be. I don't know. It might be a good one.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I think that's good.
I don't really understand this one 100%. I kind of.
Yeah, I get the gist of it, but I need to have a little play. I think.
Deeper.
Yeah, I'd have to have a play to think more. But that's a fascinating one. Maybe if we get a chance to do some more advanced ones, I need to catch up on a couple of the more recent things. I'm guessing this is fairly recent. This one.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's quite. So do you guys have a?
Thank you. Cheers. Good evening. All right. Thanks for coming along. Yeah, great. I think we're going to try and do something late January, early February next year, which will be all Cypress oriented as well. So if you're into Cypress and testing, we're going to try and do a bit more of a deep dive into Cypress early next year as well. But yeah, we're jumping around a few topics. So any ideas, recommendations, please drop us a message. Say, it'd be great if you could do something around this subject as well. Yeah. I know that when we did last month, we were trying to cover so much in such a short space of time. We just felt over. So we're not going to do that again tonight. I'd rather people have time to leave and finish early than we're going up until sort of 9 o'clock, and then we're at 9:15 all of a sudden going, actually, we're going to have to just cut off short there. We went the opposite way last time. It was too much information. We'll meet somewhere in the middle next. But hopefully it was interesting and useful. Yeah, it's a good idea, I think, and it does pay dividends, especially if you're working in a big corporate organisation and they do have multiple outlets for things. Or you just want to share things to the world. Just say, here you go, look, I've built all this stuff. We're trying to get into open source, as Eddie said. It's a great entry point for your company to get involved in open source.
Well, even it's great for your company to get into inner source.
Wow, that too. Sharing just between teams. I mean, that's one of the first things that the current place said was actually, you know what, we've got this great branding stuff here that's all on brand. We've done a really good job getting on brand. Can this team over here use it? And we said, yes, they can. So now other teams are starting to use it as well.
Yeah, and like the React space.
That's really good.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing to do.
In the React space, they have a few ways to like reject, themable things from components, which makes it really easy to use like content APIs and methods. But there's a lot of like CSS and JS solutions. I'm not sure if Angular has some types of things, but like being able to create white label components is like a great starting point. It would be awesome to not have to like spin up other projects for a different theming, but like somehow be able to connect that in.
Yeah, so that's more the way the material does it, I think. So the material doesn't spin up multiple projects. I have been mostly, the main reason for mostly doing that was because they were so different in how they wanted the components to look and feel that trying to just add some CSS wasn't enough. But your material does it just with CSS to say, actually, I want multiple color themes, or I want different logos to be used or something. Then that's much easier to do. And certainly, have a look at the way, obviously on their project on GitHub, they do their theming stuff. And it's not that difficult. They just have a little script that runs through the CSS files, and they, within each of the components, it references to that CSS file rather than into the component. You have to look at the code to see what I mean, but it then just builds out. You have then multiple CSS files that get made. So there's some core stuff that all of the components always have, and then there's some additional stuff that each of those CSS files defines. So font sizes, colors, etc. These kinds of things. Okay, all right. Have a lovely evening. Okay, cheers.
I was wondering, do you guys have, you said you had a Slack channel?
Yes. Yeah, get on to Slack. If you go to our website, so codemortals.io, and then, unless the link's expired again, you should be able to click on here. Cool. So I know we had a couple of times we had to redo it, even though we told it never to expire. Yeah, we're starting to build. I think there must be getting close to 100 people onto the Slack channel by now. We're certainly trying to get more on there. They're not necessarily the most talkative lot, but normally when someone asks something, someone gets back pretty quick.
It's hard to find Angular communities. Yeah, there's not many. There's way more React stuff.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been Angular through and through for too long, unfortunately. But whilst I've dabbled with React, my knowledge of it is not as great. I've probably done over the last 4 years, maybe as much as 6 months, probably not even full-time, part-time with React.
Yeah, I've done a bit of React as well. I don't know, I just prefer
I like the types it's got, and they're just a general mantra, because React, as Eddie and I always joke a little bit, it really is more of a library, whereas Angular as a framework, it's got everything you need and it shakes out. The downside is that React can produce a much smaller, for a small project, a much smaller payload, but if you have a bigger project, then Angular's got everything you need out of the box. You'd have to go there, and certainly when I've worked on React projects, you go in and you say, oh, I'd like to just update this dependency because it has a new feature that would make things much easier. They go, well, we don't update dependency. You go, why? So just try it and you'll see. And it just breaks everything.
That's why enterprises like Angular, because it's like very robust.
Yeah, it's all fully tested.
It's all fully tested, yeah. It's the Angular way is kind of opinionated, so you know as well, when you go to do an Angular project, it's kind of generally the same, but when you do a React project, it can be done differently.
There's so many different ways, yeah. I mean, whilst most of them probably use Axios to do they won't all do that. They could choose something different, whereas with Angular, no, they're going to be using the HTTP client for it.
And it's the same. And I think, I think Angular is not popular right now, but I think it's kind of gaining a bit more, coming back a little bit.
I think it is coming back a bit because people are starting to get a little bit cheesed off, I think, with some of the React projects they join into later on. Because I think if you're there from day one, it becomes your baby a little bit and you know what's going on. But when they bring other people in and the project's been going for a year, someone comes and goes, oh, this isn't how I'm used to React. Where am I? Is this actually a React project? I was told it was React. It is React, it's just it doesn't look like it. It's so different.
Which is kind of the problem.
Yeah.
I'm kind of trying to do both because I want to get a good rounded understanding of different frameworks.
Absolutely, I think you've got to appreciate them. And then there's Vue as well. Have you had a chance to look at that?
Yeah. I actually like it.
Vue is nice.
It's a bit like Angular actually, but not as heavyweight. It has some similarity, especially with even the structural stuff like this stuff before. It's just a Vue.
I think Vue is a very good balance for things. It's a nice balanced project.
Yeah.
Angular is probably a bit more, I don't know if the word hardcore is right, but there's a lot there, but it's got it all. Whilst you might feel lost for the first 6 months if you're a new person getting involved, once you've got your head around it, you know how to read the documentation. Because even just reading the documentation to start with is quite kind of, I don't know what I'm doing.
I think it's a bit of a sunk cost, but I've been using Angular for quite a while. I've been using it for 3 or 4 years now. So I think when I first started, it was really tough as a junior. It was like, oh my god, this is so hard. Actually, this is what web development's like. It's just really tough. But actually, I think again that's why a lot of people go to React, because it's a lot less mental overhead to get the first bit. But I think being a junior and doing React, is I think doing a junior and doing Angular is a good idea, because it gives you the kind of layout. In a sense, and it gives you like the correct. Well, you don't have to, but it gives you the correct environment to follow the good practices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could play it back to when I started development, probably slightly after I started, but one of the first languages I learned was PHP. Whilst I'd done other things at university or whatever, I did PHP because everyone was using it to build websites. And I felt it felt, again, a bit like React. It was all a little bit different everywhere you went. People were doing things different. Whilst it was more of a framework, it had most things in there. People were still finding their own ways of doing things. And yeah, after 5-6 years, I joined a company and they had a big Java element to them. And I got involved, whoa, this is just blowing my mind here. There's so much more complicated stuff to do. And again, after about 6 months, I understood it all. I knew what generics were on about, how, et cetera, and you start flying forward and going, it's all just so structured. It's more opinionated, and I don't have to guess. Everyone's doing it the same kind of way. And so it's that kind of relationship. Again, it's like PHP versus Java. It's kind of React versus Angular in some respects. So yeah, you might be able to do that stuff really quick. So PHP was really quick, great for prototyping stuff. And it was good for big projects as well. But as the projects grew and people came and go,
I think that's the thing. Is getting all those dependencies, as you said, working together. It can be a nightmare. I mean, if you've got good project management and forward-thinking like developers, you can kind of mitigate that. But it's tough. Like it's not. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So is there a lot of
I wouldn't say everyone is, because we do sort of streams and stuff. Whilst a lot of the streams are about Angular, we do other stuff. So, but always have a check out the YouTube channel as well. You'll see us doing some weird. We did a series. We started this thing, Code Combat. And the first series was basically me versus Eddie, because we just thought it would be great to get other people in and do something. What do we do? Let's just try something else. So we did 5. The streams were about 2 hours long, but it was 5 one-hour sessions. So whilst there was some preamble and some post-amble, it was an hour of coding, heads down against each other to try and do something in that hour, with the whole series being the goal to build some kind of basic blog. And you'll see some of the silly banter that goes on. I mean, you might want to skip a few bits here and there, but certainly when it gets close towards the end, we're starting to have a bit of a go, put each other off a little bit. And I think for was it the first episode or the second one, my code was completely broken at the end. I was like, and then 5 minutes after we finished the stream, I realised what it was. I just missed like a value in one of the module imports, or I put the module import in the wrong one.
It's so hard to code when you're like being on.
When you're on pressure, under pressure.
Everyone's watching, so it's great.
But it was good. By the end of the 5, it was so close, and that was the interesting thing I found, was that whilst we were both doing the same kind of goals, like the first one was front end first. We did Angular first to do the front end. Then the second one, I think, was doing some Node and doing some back-end stuff. I think the third one we added in testing to get some testing stuff in there. The third one was full stack, so bring the two together. Then the fourth one was add some testing to see who can get some testing in, what kind of cut stuff do you can focus on for. And then the last one was kind of just finish your blog kind of thing, see how far you can get. And by the end of it, it was quite interesting how similar they were. But we set some parameters for each other. Like for the first one, Eddie said I wasn't allowed to use Angular material, but he was. So we were allowed to kind of define something. And for the second one, did Eddie use TypeScript? One of us used TypeScript with Node, and one of us didn't use TypeScript with Node. So we tried to just make it have slight differences into what the challenge was, just to see how much of a difference that affected us.
How did you find TypeScript with Node? I've done it as well.
Yeah, I do it normally. That's what we normally do, is TypeScript with Node. But when you're starting a new project off, we used Express, I think, as well. So the common factor was we both used Express, but one of us did it with TypeScript, one of us did it without TypeScript. Out the box, Express doesn't set up TypeScript for you, so there's a setup element to doing that. And doing that again under pressure, you're right, I need this, I need to make sure I've got the builder in there to build out TypeScript. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, they're quite good fun. If you have a browser around, they'll see the sort of things we talk about. But that's introduced slightly different orders, because some people like the testing side, some people might like the Node side, some people like the Angular side.
So do you do Node stuff as well?
Yeah, I mean, we do full stack normally, so normally do the whole lot, including doing the operations side of writing the CI scripts and making sure that all the GCP, we use GCP at the moment, make sure all the servers get booted up, new projects get created. So Google Cloud Platform.
You use Google, okay.
Also do AWS AWS as well. AWS is what?
It's kind of clear.
Yeah. So yeah, I loved AWS. I still do love AWS, but having spent the last 18 months now doing a lot more with GCP, if I was to pick between the two, which one would I go with? I never thought I'd say it, but I'd actually say GCP now. Again, it comes back to those arguments. Whilst there's some things I love about AWS, I really liked CloudFormation. It was great to do stuff with, but AWS has got so many options now. There's so many different things you can do. You kind of go, well, should I be using that or that? And I've got to understand so many of them, whereas Google have tried to keep it a lot more consolidated as far as, if you want to do this, this is the way to do it. If you want to do this is the way to do it. So that, and I do quite like that. You're not having to get too concerned, and it all works just like AWS. But yeah, I think I would probably recommend GCP now. Just when I started out, I think GCP as well is growing really fast. It's adding so much so quickly, whereas AWS they're adding kind of new services all the time. So very comparable, really. Yeah, I would say there's little in it. Whilst somewhat on, I'm trying to think what a good comparison would be. I'd have to check the pricing again, but you might say on GCP App Engine is 2 pence an hour more expensive than Elastic Beanstalk. Don't quote me on that because I can't remember which one's more, but then storage might be 5 pence cheaper on there. So yeah, it kind of all balances out. Because certainly the load balancers on GCP are much cheaper than the load balancers on AWS. So, okay, yeah, okay, we'll start wrapping up. We're going to need to wrap up.
Okay, cool. It's like 10 minutes to back up. Could you look at this, Andrew? They're all having the same problem. I think it's what it is. There's no package of JSON. Why is that?
So what was this? This was following what we did on the screen, yeah?
Yeah. So this is the project.
Oh, this is the dist. This is what's been built.
Yeah, so this is the library.
Okay, yeah, so that's...
There's no package.json in there.
And when it was built, what was the command that was used? I assume it was the one I did. So ng build, I don't know whatever the name of the lib was, designs. Yeah, same as me. So.
I didn't put the name on it. I just did this. I just did npm run build.
Yes, if you do run build, that will build the main application, which doesn't come with a package.json.
Build the library.
Yeah, you build the applications if you were going to deploy the app somewhere. So if I was deploying this out as a documentation, I would run that command.
Is it the project design?
No, you don't have to do project. Just the name of that project. So just design. Yeah, you need to spell design correctly though. Great to talk to you. Yeah, say hi on Slack, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime.
Now you have to change in the Angular.json.
So nothing should change. Oh, did I change? So yeah, in order to do the symlink, so this is your project, and this is your library. So in the project, you have to add to the options, preserve symlinks. I don't know if it comes up. Yeah, hopefully it will. Cool. There it is. Preserve symlinks. There it is. And then that needs to be set to true. Cool. And then that will allow when the library changes, it will auto pick those changes
Do I
up.
have to install again?
Not for that. You'll need to restart it. If you're running the project, you'll have to restart the project because it'll pick up the changes for AngularJSON anyway when you restart it. But yeah, you won't have to do an npm install as long as you've already got the npm install done before.
That was the reason. Yes. You know why? Because this isn't
Should I start packing your stuff up? I've got a feeling they literally want us walking out the door at 9.
Oh, really?
That's what it said. They said you've got to be out of here by 9. So.
Okay. That's there now.
Oh, it works. Awesome.
I think so.
Okay, let's put stuff here. If you want to put mine here, Andrew as well, it's fine.
Yeah.
I learned something new as well. I love this stuff. I learned something new as well. Because I did this yesterday, but I did it maybe copy and pasting with documentation or whatever. Now, doing it, like thinking about it, it's like, I'm never going to forget that now. Never.
How they were all Friday, what's the general feedback? Too much tech, too much talking, not enough us joking around.
Too much joking around, maybe.
Too much joking around,
Playing
perhaps.
all the time.
Yeah, we get accused of both sides. We try to do a piece of. What do you reckon? Is that okay?
Would you like a bit more?
To see how much code is changed. Building a proper library, that's new.
Well, it's amazing how simple some things are as well. 'Cause some things sound really daunting and hard, but actually it's not that hard.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much, mate. Cheers. Yeah, hopefully it was interesting. And entertaining as well. Thank you so much for coming. Have a safe journey back when you're heading home. You going back later this week after the conference?
Yes, I'm going on Sunday.
Cool. Let me give you a card that you can connect on LinkedIn. I should have handed these out as well.
Thank you.
No worries. I know both of you have my cards already. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoy the conference. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm not. You won't see me till 2020.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm in next
Merry
week.
Christmas, yeah. I'm sure because I think all the devs are in next Wednesday, but
Well, I'm not sure if we are or not.
I want to work
Confirm
both.
it, so, yeah, we may well be.
Just in case.
Yeah, hopefully
Merry
we'll see
Christmas and Happy
you.
New Year.
Yeah, have a great break, and yeah, we'll see you in the new year. I guess.
See you soon. I guess you're coming to our GDG Cloud Angular course.
Of course.
Oh, that's end of Feb. It started.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Bye. And thank you so much for your help. Really appreciate it.